I'm going to be speaking to you regarding state funding that's available for flood resilience in Virginia. And let me just get this set up here. Okay, Dr. Mitchell's presentation really helped to frame the issue that coastal flooding from sea level rise, is expected to get worse over the coming decades. But we also have another flooding issue, and that is mainly due to climate change. As you probably have noticed in the news, Buchanan County in far southwest Virginia has had two very serious floods within the last 15 months. The first one last summer, it caused loss of life. Many people have lost their homes. There's been damage to the local transportation network, which by the time they had the second flood this summer, there was still damage from last year's flood that had yet to be repaired, and debris had yet to be removed, which kind of compounded issues when the second flood came. There's also been a less significant but notable flood in Wise County in the Pound area this year. So all out in Southwest Virginia. So three significant floods in that part of the state within the last 15 months, even though we have not had any hurricanes or tropical storms during that period of time. And that's really the concern, is that you have sea level rise, you have climate change, you have unnamed storms that are just causing flooding all over the place and across the country. You've seen, what's happening in Yellowstone and Death Valley and in other places, Dallas most recently. So flooding is everywhere and is going to be everywhere. So what the state has been doing is we have been trying to establish, we have established a flood resilience planning program within the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And mainly, most of the funding for this has come from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI for short. RGGI is an auction-based program that generates funding through the sale of carbon allowances to electric utilities. And Virginia is currently one of 11 RGGI state members, basically from Virginia northward along the Atlantic coast. DCR is not the only beneficiary of RGGI funds. In fact, half the funding goes for low-income efficiency programs to the Department of Housing and Community Development. 45% goes into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, or the Flood Fund, as I'll refer to it. A few dollars go to DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, for administrative expenses. They are the official administrator for RGGI in Virginia. And 2% go to Housing Community Development and Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy for administrative expenses related to low-income efficiency programs. The funds, as far as DCR goes, are used to provide grants, and in the future there will be loans to localities and communities to do flood resilience planning and projects. It also, however, funded the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, which the phase 1 was completed in December of last year by new legislation the General Assembly adopted in the last session. Phase 2 refinements to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan have to be completed by December of 2024. There's also funding for a statewide resilience master plan that the General Assembly has mandated be completed by December of 2026. And it also funds the DCR staff that support all of the above activities. The Flood Fund was established in state code, and it is solely for the purpose of enhancing flood protection or prevention and coastal resilience. But it is to be used across the Commonwealth in communities that are subject to recurrent or repetitive funding. 25% of the money is reserved for low-income geographic areas. I'll talk more about that later. And priority is given to community-scale activities, not individual properties, and for those that use a nature-based solution where possible. So to date, the Flood Fund has been available for 3 specific types of activities: capacity building and planning, studies that will be used for planning, and flood prevention and protection projects. In order to qualify for flood funds for projects, you have to have an approved resilience plan. There are currently 14 localities that have an approved plan, with 1 pending in Tidewater, but only one of those 14 that have been approved to date is from outside of Eastern Virginia, and that's in Dickinson County. And that's important to note because many of those localities don't have access to the data that the coastal localities do, and therefore, and nor do they have the capacity. And by capacity, we mean primarily staffing, contractors where applicable, and the flood fund is to be used to increase capacity, not to supplant existing staff or existing funding for projects. So the particular challenge outside of Eastern Virginia is that they don't have the data that's needed in order to do the planning that's necessary, and therefore they can't proceed to flood prevention and protection projects because they can't develop a resilience plan because they lack the information and or the capacity to do so at this time. So the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, the Flood Fund, as mentioned, is currently funded by RGGI. RGGI has quarterly auctions. The next auction is actually today, September 7th. You probably have seen in the press in the recent weeks that the DEQ Air Board had a meeting and has decided to pursue a regulation to withdraw Virginia from RGGI. And the projected timeline for that is by December of 2023. In the meantime, funding from continuing quarterly auctions until then will still go into the flood fund and the other funds, the other agencies as mentioned. So there will continue to be rounds of flood fund grants, and we are looking to launch loans in calendar 2023. We've been meeting with Virginia Resource Authority about how best to do that. And you'll see more information about that within the next several months. The 2022 General Assembly also established Virginia Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, and they seeded that fund with $25 million of funds that were in the flood fund. And so that will be used to offer low interest loans, which if done properly could possibly perpetuate this fund indefinitely. The other thing that's different about the Resolving Resilience Loan Fund is that the funds can be used for projects by homeowners. So the way we're thinking about that is that the loan would be made, a block loan would be made to a locality, and the locality in turn would establish its own program to give small loans to homeowners so that they can do their own individual projects. One concern about such small scale individual projects is that when one property owner tends to fortify their property, particularly along the coastlines, it can cause downstream impacts to neighboring properties. So this is something that we're particularly concerned about and are working to try to figure out ways to address that before this loan is launched. Currently, we are still in Community Flood Preparedness Fund round 3. Actually, that solicitation was from January to April of 2022. $40 million was advertised, which was the largest amount to date. However, a number of applicants, perhaps anticipating that that might be the final round, which it is not, flooded us with applications. So we received 64 applications for over $91 million. And that's a large reason for the delay in making awards, in making decisions about whether or not to give the full awards requested to the amount that we made available, or to give reduced awards to more applicants. And this has been discussed with the administration, and the review of the applications is near completion. And so we do anticipate award announcements by the end of this month. We are, in response to comments we've received from a number of areas, increasing transparency. So all the applications for round 3 of the flood fund are currently online at this website. Final scoring of applications will also be posted. So here's the recent history of the flood fund. I need to change my view. We started off small, basically learning as we went along, basically how best to administer this program. $18 million was made available in the first round, $17 million in the second, or $17 million awarded, $18 million awarded in the first round, $40 million currently available in this round. You see the number of applications, you see the funds requested. I said $91 million, actually $92 million requested this round. We do have the 25% low income requirement, so we will be, we will be addressing that. And when you receive an award from the flood fund, you have 3 years to obligate those funds. So there will be a round 4 of the flood fund, probably in early calendar 2023. The amount of that offering will be determined by the auctions. Again, as I mentioned, there's an auction today. There should be another auction in December. And that will allow us to know basically how much we can offer in round 4. There will, however, be some changes to the program going forward. Again, because we've learned as we've gone along, and there are some things that we need to better clarify for applicants. We are going to establish caps. Currently, the flood fund has minimums, but we are going to establish caps as well. We recently received an application for some $29 million, which obviously is something that we never anticipated. So we will be addressing caps going forward. We also need to better explain in the grant manual what is meant by community scale. We have seen applications for individual property owners or for 2 property owners together. We do not consider that community scale. We also shall be clarifying what is meant by low income. Dr. Mitchell mentioned how in rural areas the census blocks can be very large and include both low income areas as well as other areas that are not. We've seen applications for property owners who clearly are not low income but are within a low income census block applying as a low income project. So that's obviously not the intent of the program. And we will be addressing impacts of previous floods, as we've learned in Buchanan County, as I mentioned, that resilience plans for communities need to also address the impacts of previous floods, in particular debris removal. We will also be trying to be even more transparent about the application round with regards to posting the grant manual for public comment when it's ready to go. There will also be a review committee that will be established to review grant applications and to advise the department and administration as to which projects we should fund. So that will all be in round 4 in early calendar 2023. Some related activities that the General Assembly has established. As I mentioned, there's now a new Resilient Virginia Revolving Loan Fund that DCR would administer in partnership with the Virginia Resources Authority. It has been seeded, as mentioned, with $25 million of monies from the flood fund. We are working with VRA to develop guidelines, in particular how the loans will be structured and what will qualify for loans. And again, the transparency will apply to the increased transparency will apply to the revolving loan fund as well as the flood fund. Also related to this, we are reconvening the Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee. They are meeting later this month. The TAC has been codified now in state code with specific responsibilities, in particular for developing, updating, and implementing the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, as I mentioned, which has to be revised by December of 2024. But they also to advise the department regarding the statewide resilience master plan that's due by 2026. The code requires them to meet quarterly, and it also lays out basically who is to be invited to participate on the TAC. You see the long list of agencies. I won't go through that. That are spelled out, and so all of those offices have been contacted and invited to participate, as well as I would note the director of the Office of Diversity, Opportunity, and Inclusion is among the invitees, and Dr. Rosa Atkins will be participating on the TAC. And other representatives can be called. All are serving at the pleasure of the governor. And so anyone who wants to be on the TAC, would need to be endorsed by the governor's office. Also, there is going to be a working group on resilience, establishing an entity. There was unsuccessful legislation last session to establish a Coastal Virginia Resilience Authority as the single entity to coordinate resilience efforts and to attract federal funding for resilience. One of the things that was an issue with that proposal was that it was felt that it needed to be a statewide body. And so there is going to be a working group very soon that will be headed up by the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources to discuss how a resilience entity should be structured and what its responsibilities should be. And you can look for legislation in the 2023 General Assembly to try again to establish such a body. And then finally, the department is working on a community outreach and engagement plan. This was also required by the General Assembly out of the last session. And so the DCR working with the DEI director in coordination with the Coastal Resilience Officer, which has not formally been named, but the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources will serve in that capacity until someone is named. And the Special Assistant for Resilience, formerly Admiral Phillips, who has moved on to a position in Washington in the Biden administration. That position has not yet been named, but we will all work together and to prepare a community outreach and engagement plan, which department staff have been working on for some time, as well as working with a number of NGOs to get some input on what is needed in such a plan. So that plan should be out for public comment very soon. And we are aiming to have it finalized by December 31st, which is what the code calls for.